Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Myanmar. As political reforms kick in, the country once known as Burma is open for business. But as the world beats a path to Yangon, just what is up for grabs? Also, Madrid's SOS. The government's got no money, the banks need money, and the people need jobs. And Japan puts on stellar growth, but its hard-fought gains could all fall apart because of Eurozone shocks too. So keep your eyes on Myanmar. That is our message this week as we look at what could well be Asia's next economic tiger. After decades of political repression and economic isolation, foreign investment is now flooding in. Yes, businesses need to keep a close eye to make sure the reforms actually do happen, but already there are real indicators of the potential in Myanmar. Top of the list is Myanmar's proven gas reserves, estimated at 22.5 trillion cubic feet and not nearly fully exploited. Though there is a $2.5 billion gas pipeline deal which will supply southern China with energy by next year. That is expected to provide a major boost to Myanmar's export earnings. All told, GDP is forecast to hit $124 billion by 2020, double the current amount. So there is plenty of scope and indeed plenty to learn about the country, which is why I'm so pleased to have Veronica Pedrosa with us here in the studio this week, back from the World Economic Forum in Bangkok. And of course, you've been to Myanmar, you've reported from Myanmar before, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. I guess the reason we're talking about Myanmar in relation to the World Economic Forum is the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi went there, such a significant move.
It was really fascinating to be there and witness her arrival, as it were, on the world stage. She hasn't been able to travel for more than 20 years, and she chose this business forum, a kind of apex of capitalism, to go and support the cause of her country being a good place to invest. That's not to say that it won't be difficult to actually go through the realities of starting a business in Myanmar. Let's not forget that it has been isolated for so long, and that's what's put Western investors off for so long. So there's a lot of potential, but watching the story unfold is going to be a very complex matter. Let's have a look at what it was actually like at the forum.
When Aung San Suu Kyi arrived at a major business conference in Bangkok, it was as if her country itself had stepped onto the world stage. International sanctions against doing business with Myanmar had effectively isolated its economy from globalization. A series of reforms by the military-backed government, including the release of political prisoners like Aung San Suu Kyi, has changed all that. It's as if Myanmar were the new El Dorado, the mythical lost city of gold made real.
The media frenzy surrounding the first international appearance of Aung San Suu Kyi is testament to the single-minded determination with which she's kept Myanmar on the international news agenda.
But Ms. Suu herself played down economic expectations, warning investors against reckless optimism.
I would not like you to be over-optimistic. I think optimism is good, but cautious optimism. These days, I'm coming across a lot of what I would call reckless optimism. That is not going to help you, it's not going to help us. So we need a balanced report. A little bit of healthy skepticism, I think, is in order.
Even a brief visit to the country shows just how far it's lagged behind compared to regional neighbours like Thailand and Indonesia. Some investors see the potential for extracting natural resources like oil and gas. Property prices have shot up. In the biggest city, Yangon, it's as expensive to buy as New York. Tourism's another potential earner for the country, but government officials recognise they're not yet ready for a big influx of investment.
Until as recently as last year, it's been an ethical question whether or not to actually go to Myanmar as a tourism for many of the English-speaking countries. So this is nothing less than a seismic change to see the country actually gearing up to welcome many more tourists. And in fact, the World Economic Forum East Asia is going to be held in Myanmar next year.
Next year, of course. What's that actually like? Given you've reported from there, I remember very early in Al Jazeera's existence, you were reporting from Naypyidaw, I think it was then. Yeah. I mean, what's it like as a place to go to?
You know, Infrastructure really is a serious issue for the government as it tries to attract investors from around the region and around the world. Energy, you've mentioned already, is crucial. Roads are very important. Just getting people trained up to deal with services. All of these are going to be starting from pretty much square one. Education has been appalling. Children learn by rote, as it were. Initiative, innovation has simply not been encouraged under a repressive military regime, and that's a disadvantage when it comes to economics. However, I do have to mention that it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and it is the biggest country in mainland Southeast Asia. There's a wonderful range of environments and landscapes, from the mountains where you can actually ski at some points of the year, that's on the border with Thailand, with China,
So it's
to
got all this-
tropical beaches.
it's got all this
Exactly.
potential, basically,
It really
then,
does,
hasn't
yeah,
it?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. There is also a sense from the tourism department of the government that they're committed to doing more about it. I actually managed to speak to a government official. They're rare to come by, Myanmar officials who'll speak on camera, and he told me what his expectations are. The Chao Phraya River is one of the great tourist attractions here in Bangkok. Yangon has
Yeah,
its
we
own
also
river.
have a big river called Ayeyarwady. It's the mainstream of our country, and also in the region, Mekong, Chao Phraya, Ayeyarwady. So we also have such kinds of the big rivers in the region.
Do you think it could be as much of a tourist attraction, as big of a deal in Myanmar as it is here in Thailand?
Yes, you see, but in Thailand they have 15, 14 million, something like that per annum, the arrival. But right now we don't have such kind of the big volume. Last year we received 400,000, and this year we have a 35% growth in tourist arrivals.
35%.
So 35%. So this year we will receive at the least 550,000. This is especially from the Yangon International Airport. But we have such kind of the volume in the borders, especially from Thailand and China.
I wanted to ask though, it must be causing a lot of pressure to Myanmar's infrastructure. What are the priorities actually to get the tourism industry growing?
Yeah, first we have the products in nature or in culture. We have the good products, but we need not only the infrastructure, but also the product development and also the human resource. Human resource development is also very important. Otherwise, tourists will come over, and if they are not satisfied, our destination will be collapsed in a few years' time. That's why we have to be worried about our readiness. Readiness is also very important.
So how important is a meeting like this?
Yeah.
Have you been able to meet with people who can do that kind of investment?
Yes, this is a good chance for us to get together with other people also. But such kind of the what we call WEF on East Asia, the main theme is the interconnectivity. So in the ASEAN, in the region, in the GMS, we are all in the what we call the major what we call the major organizations. So in the east or in the region, ASEAN, Greater Mekong sub-region, Ayeyarwady, Chao Phraya, Mekong, economic strategy, something like that. And also in the ASEAN, there are also Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam.
It's
This
a
is also
big
the
change,
CLMV.
though, for Myanmar. It's a big change.
Right.
It's the first time, really, that Myanmar has come to a big meeting like
Yes, good.
this. So, what's it like? Realistically, what are your expectations or prospects for Myanmar tourism?
You see, now we are involved in such kind of the great meeting. So the people are curious about Myanmar, and they want to know where Myanmar is. Most of the people, especially in the region, they don't know about Myanmar. Where is it? Now they can get the name. Now Myanmar is on the rise in terms of the political sensitivity, in terms of the openness of the country as a destination. So this is a good what we call opportunity for us to get contact with the other peoples.
So then how does Myanmar fit into the regional picture there? Because if it's opening up, there's got to be influence and interest from all these other countries coming in around the place.
It actually fits in with the picture of global economic realignment quite well. As a matter of fact, that was one of the topics of conversation that I had with the chief economist of IHS Global Insight, Rajiv Biswas, while I was at the World Economic Forum. And I started off asking him about his estimation that India will soon be overtaking Japan as one of the third major economy in the world. We also talked about Myanmar, but we began with India.
Well, I think what we're seeing now is the rise of the Asian BRICS. China and India for some years have been growing very rapidly, and Japan, of course, has been going through a very difficult period. 2 lost decades is what they say. And so we're seeing a rapid convergence in the size of the GDP of India compared to the Japanese GDP. And we expect that in about 10 years' time, we'll reach the point where actually the Japanese GDP is the same as India's GDP. And from there on, India's GDP, we expect, will continue to rapidly exceed Japan's, because basically you've got a situation where Japan's growing in the range of 1% to 2% per year. Whereas India, we think, can grow about 8% per year, perhaps even higher in the long term. So we're really seeing a rebalancing of the Asian economies with the rise of China, the rise of India, whereas Japan's sort of tapering off. And I think we're also seeing a global rebalancing where the rise of China and India are changing the shape of the global economy and becoming much more important factors in global economic growth.
What impact do you think the crisis in the Eurozone is going to have on the rest of the world, and particularly in Asia?
Well, I think if we are in a situation where Greece has to exit the Eurozone, and certainly the probability of that has increased very substantially in the last few weeks, then the key will be how well the Eurozone economies can build firewalls to prevent contagion from a Greece exit to the rest of the crisis economies in Europe. And a key issue there is banking sector runs, because obviously if the news comes out that countries are leaving the euro, people may want to get their money out and keep their euros rather than switching to their new currency, which would most likely fall. So this is the contagion risk. If the Eurozone can effectively build the firewalls to prevent that kind of contagion and can convince people in Spain, Portugal, Ireland that they're definitely staying in the Eurozone, then the contagion from Greece may be rather limited, because now the Eurozone has had several years to think through their firewall strategy. They've built up their stabilization mechanisms and funds. So there is, I think, a more assurance from the Eurozone that they will be able to take the measures necessary to prevent contagion. And that's what we believe, that contagion will be prevented. In this kind of situation, we'd still probably see a lot of turbulence in financial markets around the Greek exit. There's a lot of downside risk still with that kind of situation. But the contagion to Asia would be relatively limited, because we wouldn't expect to see the whole of the Eurozone going into a deep dive similar to 2008. So it wouldn't be a Lehman event as long as they build those firewalls.
There's a lot of attention focused on Myanmar as it emerges after the lifting of decades-long sanctions by Western economies. What do you think the prospects are for Myanmar?
I think this is very exciting. What we're seeing, that a country that's been closed for many years has now seen very rapid political reforms and economic reforms. Since April, we've seen the unification of the exchange rate, which has made it a much more attractive economy to invest in from the point of view of the exchange rate that's the official rate. And we've just seen a new investment law that's come through the parliament. And of course, the key issue is that Western sanctions have been suspended, and that's opening the door for a lot of European companies, US companies, to start to put their foot back in the water in terms of Myanmar. There's a lot of opportunities for companies in Myanmar. The oil and gas sector is probably at the forefront of thinking of many oil companies around the world. a lot of Asian oil companies already on the ground, and there's interest from Western companies as well. But there's other sectors that are doing well, particularly I think tourism last year saw a very rapid growth, and given the focus now in Myanmar that we're seeing, I would expect that it's going to be a boom industry for some years to come, with a lot of investment going into sectors such as hotels and tourism and other parts of the tourism industry as well. I think Myanmar used to be the rice bowl of Southeast Asia, and that's a role it can again assert. I think if we get the new rice technology, improvement of the marketing systems and milling technology, I think we could also see agriculture emerge as a rising star of the Myanmar economy.
But surely there's a long way to go before that happens.
I think the reforms that we've seen in the last few months are extremely positive, the political reforms, the economic reforms, and even before we saw those reforms, we had expected the Myanmar economy to be growing at about 6% per year over the medium term. As a result of the reforms that we've seen, I think we're going to get quite a lot of new investment coming in, not only from the private sector in sectors such as oil and gas, tourism, and other parts of the economy, but I also think there's going to be a lot of multilateral aid coming in. Clearly, many countries around the world want to support the positive reforms that are happening in Myanmar. So I think we are going to get some agreements soon in terms of multilateral aid flowing back into Myanmar, and that will be important. But also I think there's a lot of interest from bilateral donors in becoming engaged again in Myanmar as well. So I think over the next few years we're going to see a big pickup in aid-related projects in Myanmar in terms of developing physical infrastructure, social infrastructure like health and education. So I think in terms of our growth forecast of around 6% per year, the risk is on the upside, that instead of growing at 6%, they may well be growing at 7%, 8% or even higher. So I think Myanmar is definitely in tiger territory over the next 3 to 4 years, which is of course very exciting in terms of Southeast Asia's growth dynamics.
So we've been focusing a lot on growth stories in the last few weeks, but all the while the contraction problems in the Eurozone haven't really gotten any better. In fact, arguably, they've become more acute. Spain, of course, is the big focal point now. The banks are in a mess. There's pressure for a bailout. But it's the same old issue of no one, and that is the people, the politicians and the policymakers being able to agree on what to do. How did Spain get here? We'll have a look at this from Jonah Hull as he explores the unemployment problems that crippled Spain's economy.
It's not on the balance sheets of the banks nor in the hallways of Brussels. Rather, it's here in the employment office that the pain of Spain's economic crisis is really being felt.
We've been filming inside this employment office for most of the morning, and people have been streaming in and out. Very few of them are willing to talk to us, willing to tell us their story, and it's, well, you can understand that.
On a busy day, up to 700 people pass through, among 20,000 registered in this office alone, serving a single district of Madrid.
We've had other crises in Spain before. The 90s were very bad years, with high levels of unemployment as well. But perhaps now we're in a more difficult situation, more difficult and more prolonged.
Luis Troyano is a 41-year-old father of two. He's a barman, cook and waiter, and he hasn't had a job for a year. He's willing to do almost anything, even offering himself for training as a gardener. But the options are few.
Well, they've given me the possibility of working outside Spain. Things are hard. Let's see what solution we can find.
With no offers at home, Spanish workers like Luis are looking elsewhere in the European Union. He's among the almost 1 in 4 Spaniards currently out of work, a number that's likely to rise with the economy in recession and government spending cuts taking hold.
It's very difficult because to bring up a family, you must pay for 2 sons so they can eat every day, a mortgage for the apartment so you don't end up in the street. Everything's difficult. The situation for the unemployed in Spain is very, very hard because the government doesn't give us much money.
Luis says he wants the rest of Europe to know how bad things are here in Spain. It's questionable how much the rest of Europe is willing or able to help.
So you see there the effects of Spain's economic problems, but what we want to think about now is how it can actually start recovering, or at least get out of trouble. Stephen Pope is going to help us do that. He is the managing partner and founder of Spotlight Ideas, a market analysis group. Stephen, thank you for your time. If you believe what Germany says, Spain needs to apply for an EU bailout now. It's got to do it for the good of the wider Eurozone. But the kind of pressure that would put on Spain, further austerity measures, that'd be a mess, wouldn't it?
Well, since his election in the assumption of office in December of last year, Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy has imposed vast amounts of austerity. It's been the strictest budget since democracy came back to Spain. So to say if they took an official loan that they've got to apply even more austerity is really not going to help the economy at all. It's just going to drive the unemployment rate, which is around 24.4% for level, and the youth unemployment, which is well past the 50% level. So really, I think they've done as much as they can at the moment on austerity, but it's a question they need help to rescue this dysfunctional banking system.
OK, so that was actually going to be my next question, the idea of the banking system. If you go after the banking system and try to, and I'm going to use this term loosely, fix the banking system, would that help? Would that actually make a difference without putting too much excess pressure onto the wider Spanish economy?
To quite a good degree it would, because we have to recognise that the problem in Spain is not a government debt crisis as it is in Greece. It really is a private sector liquidity crisis. Now, there are some good banks in Spain. Santander, BBVA are pretty useful European-sized banks. But a lot of problems are with the medium-sized banks or the regional savings institutions or the higher. There they have so many bad loans on real estate, which are very much underwater, below the price they've listed them at on their balance sheets. And it's not until we can cleanse those institutions of those toxic assets and maybe merge one or two, because Spain is very overbroke at the current time, that you then would start to see some element of confidence coming back. Unfortunately, Spain is not in a position to finance either the bailout of Bankia or indeed the entire system on its own. It needs a system.
All right, Stephen Pope there talking us through Spain's issues, and apologies for the slightly scratchy broadband line we had there. And Europe's debt crisis also threatens to lessen demand for Japanese goods. Japan says its economy did grow more than expected in the first 3 months of 2012, but that may be as good as it gets this year, unless domestic demand can make up for the likely slowdown in overseas sales. Mike Fern reports for us now from Tokyo.
Retail therapy, Japan's cure for a nation trying to get back on its feet after last year's earthquake, tsunami and nuclear meltdown. The spending spree is partly government funded. Public works projects pay the salaries of workers rebuilding the northeast. Companies get grants and near-zero interest loans to build factories and keep jobs in Japan. And shoppers get discounts to replace their cars and electronic appliances with more energy-efficient models. The prescription has paid off. Japan's economy is back to pre-earthquake levels. Capital and consumer spending are rising, for now at least.
We're probably peaking out at about 4.5% to 5% right now, but the underlying growth rate, and that's what's key in Japan. Here in Japan, we've got Mr. and Mrs. Watanabe opening their purse strings.
Those purse strings may snap shut if the Prime Minister sees through his plan of raising sales tax from 5% to 10%.
One reason there's so much political debate about whether to double consumption tax is the worry that it'll kill off consumer spending, which makes up nearly 2/3 of Japan's economy.
First, it will kill off the government that tries to implement it. This probably, with a high risk, the current Noda government. After that, of course, any tax hike in Japan will first have a negative impact.
As far as rating companies are concerned, Japan has no choice. It owes more than twice what it earns. 10 years from now, the government says there'll be $13 billion of bonds in circulation. To settle that debt, it needs to get its own spending habits in check and ask others to help foot the bill.
And that is where we're going to leave you for this week. If you want to get in touch, though, here's how you do it. Twitter's probably the easiest way. @KamalAJE is me. @Abid Oliver Ali is our business editor. And if you're not on Twitter, the email address is countingthecost@aljazeera.net. While you're online, aljazeera.com/business is where you can head. Link onto the CTC page. We put all our episodes up there for you to catch up on whenever you'd like. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.